been in the executive search business for about 25 years. I've had 13 years working with Heidrick & Struggles International, both in the UK and in Germany. And I held various leadership positions with Heidrick & Struggles. And then more recently, I've been working with NotActivelyLooking. I'm a co-founder of NotActivelyLooking, and I helped to set that business up. So, well, without further ado, we'll move on to our first question. Martin, this is it's a fascinating topic. I want to understand, why do you specialize in teaching leaders about the human mind? What makes that relevant?
Well, so having spent all this time working with leaders, worked on a whole range of topics, whatever's coming up for them, and sometimes that could be career-related, around career transition or career direction. It could be about their own leadership or about their management or how to deal with conflict, how to set a vision and strategy, and so on and so on. Okay. And what I've found over all these years is that the fundamental thing that impacts everything else at the base level is the mind and how people are using it. So it's all very well me as a leader learning about my leadership style, for example, but if I've got some deep-rooted thinking about other people, it can have a significant impact on whatever I learn around leadership. Same with conflict and any other topic. It's like the thinking that we've got going on in our head has a significant impact on all of our behaviors and our performance. So I just over the years increasingly studied the topic and found ways to help people look at and challenge the thinking that they're existing within.
When we first met up, Martin, we talked a little bit about the comparison here with sport, where clearly the sports psychologist is playing an important role nowadays in top-level sport, regardless of what sort of area of sport we're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And if you look way back, maybe 30 years ago, no one had a sports psychologist or a sports psychiatrist. In fact, it was sort of ridiculed a little bit back then. But now, of course, everyone has one because they realize that the mind has such a powerful impact. And in sport, you see it in the World Cup at the moment. There's the critical moment when you're stepping up to take a penalty. Are you in the zone? Are you in flow in that moment? Are you being your natural, powerful self? Or are you caught up in thought that has you then underperform in any moment? So yes, it's become very popular in sport, and what I see now is really no difference in business. We are performing. We're performing at our game, and to optimize our success, we need to look at the psychological dimension and what that might be doing to how we're thinking and how we're operating in any moment.
So it's really about sort of fine-tuning the engine. It's about making sure that we're in the right place in terms of the way that we're thinking and what is cluttering up. Is stuff cluttering up our mind? Because if so, we need to get that out of the way so that we can focus on the key priorities. Is that a correct interpretation?
I think that's a good summary. And if I could give a few examples of that. So there's a lot of stressed people right now, running businesses in a particularly tough climate. Mm-hmm. So stress, noisy mind is a massive thing for people, which prevents, has them feel stressed. It means they don't sleep that well. It means they're overanalyzing often and not as resilient as they'd like to be. Mm-hmm. Another example would be clarity. So when they're in that state, they don't feel they have time or space to think clearly. Yeah. And obviously that's a critical element to running a business is to be able to think clearly and strategically. Another example would be conflict. Look mm-hmm. at the conflict that goes on in teams. Well, a lot of conflict is really just a significant psychological element to what thinking that one party's got going on and what the other thinking's got the party's going on that can paralyze them into a very ineffective situation.
if we let's talk about this in terms of its relevance, and you touched on some of these topics today. Why this is relevant to senior executives. Can we kind of expand on some of those things? You talked about less noise. You talked about less stress. Where does the more confidence come into it?
Well, again, and especially this can relate very well to people looking for work or thinking about leaving their work and looking for a different role. Confidence plays a role for many people, even in senior positions. Yeah. And confidence comes in, and it can cause self-doubt. It can stop me from applying for a job. It can have me be less bold in a board meeting when I want to challenge and speak up, but I don't feel confident. It can stop me presenting so effectively at the company meeting. There's all sorts of elements where my thinking that I've got going on about myself and my capability can thwart me from being as effective as I could be.
Martin, I'm going to move on here and get to another question, because a lot of the members that come to NotActivelyLooking, they're either about to embark on a career change, or they're thinking about a career change, and confidence is critical at that juncture. It's also critical, I think. I've done a little bit of coaching with executives, and I know you've done a lot more of this, but it's very important, isn't it, that executives have that clear thinking at that moment when they're going from job A to job B. They need to be very, very clear about a whole bunch of things.
Absolutely.
And so what are some of the concerns that people have when they're thinking about a career change or a job move?
Right. So if I'm thinking about leaving, I've got all sorts of things that might be going on in my head. Yeah. If I'm thinking about leaving, I've probably been dissatisfied with where I am for one reason or another for a while.
Right.
So I end up in a conundrum. I'm unhappy where I am. I'm not totally satisfied. But do I leave? And so as I'm being not dissatisfied, my performance tends to drop a bit sometimes, actually quite often. But I'm in this conundrum of, shall I go or shall I stay? Yeah. And people get caught up in their heads of, well, I think the grass is greener, but is it? Is it going to be better over there? What if the next role doesn't work out? Mm-hmm. What's the level of risk to myself and my family? I think sometimes what do I actually want to do anyway?
Sometimes people have a very sort of, they're not quite clear as to why they're dissatisfied. That they know that they feel kind of dissatisfied, but they're not sure why. And sometimes it sort of comes out it manifests itself in other ways, doesn't it? In that I think people complain about, oh, my boss is terrible, but actually what they really mean is, I've grown out of this job. I've been doing this job too long. I need to be doing something that's going to challenge me in a different way.
Yes. And so I think it's a really great point, which is what's the real reason that they're unhappy or wanting to move? And have they got clear for that for themselves? And often because they're caught up in the busyness of life, actually they haven't sought the clarity of what they want, why they're not happy, and as a result then what they might want to do about it. Okay.
And you talked here about, remember we spoke about authenticity. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? This is sort of...
Is this with respect to the psychology, so when you're moving between jobs?
Exactly, yes, exactly, yes, yeah.
Okay. Well, then this moves on to some of my comments around when people are between jobs. Mm-hmm. They're thinking about, sometimes they're caught up in what they think they need to be for the person that's interviewing them, for the company that's interviewing them. Yeah. So they're already thinking ahead as to what they should say, how they should explain their CV, especially that bit that didn't look very good on the CV where I moved a couple of times or I was made redundant and so on. Mm-hmm. And so what they've got going on is a whole load of thinking that then can prevent them from coming across with power and authenticity.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So it's about being clear about who you are and what you are, and then being able to make a greater impact in that scenario.
Yes. And also, I mean, this links into the trust bit the confidence piece to some extent.
Yeah.
To be confident and relaxed with who you are and who you're not.
Okay, that's quite a big topic on its own, probably. But
yeah.
tell us about how does it work in terms of who we are and where we're going. How is this different?
I don't get the question.
In terms of the work that you do, Martin.
Yes.
This type of coaching that you do.
Yes.
I'd love to understand, or I'd like our members to understand a bit more about why is it different? What are you doing?
Okay.
And how does it play out for people?
Great. So what I noticed over these last 20, 30 years is that there's the mind is becoming more of a topic. People are trying to realize that it's noisy for them, or they're stressed, or they're thinking in a way that they don't want to think, and so on. So there's many techniques and methods over the recent years, not just recent years, where people are trying to manage their mind. So they might do some neuro-linguistic programming to think positively or to reframe how they're thinking. They might try and manage their stress by doing some mindfulness or yoga or meditation and other things, therapy, counseling, and so on. And all of those things really are trying to work with the content that the mind is producing, the content being whatever's going on in our heads, to try and deal with it so we can feel better and be more powerful in life. The work that we do is one level beneath that. We're not trying to fix the content or change the content of the mind. We're trying to understand the mechanics of how the mind actually works.
Okay.
And there are some really powerful, there's some pretty simple but extremely powerful principles of how the mind is working and how thought is, what thought is.
Yeah.
That once you understand to a deep level, can fundamentally transform how you come across, how you think about yourself and others, and so on and so on. And a lot of this work, I mean, actually there's many fields in science and in spirituality that are pointing to a lot of the things that we teach in our work. So the latest neuroscience and cognitive science, even some aspects of quantum physics, are pointing at some of the very nature of what's going on for us psychologically and what we need to learn about that.
Okay, fantastic, great. Tell us about, we touched on some of these questions, but how can we access, areas of our mind that we're not using properly, and how does that help us in terms of changing the way that we see things and changing our perception? Okay.
So let me sort of share a little bit of where we head in what we talk about. We talk about the nature of thought, right? So when we're talking about the nature of thought, what we're talking about is that our mind is like a bubble machine, really. It's producing thought. In fact, psychologists say that we're having 60,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
So they're flushing through us, bubbles, 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 constantly. And as the thoughts come, they create our experience, our entire experience. Mm-hmm. So they create the reality that we live within. So if I'm having thought that I'm not on good form today, or this is going to be a difficult day, then guess what? I live in this reality of feeling and experiencing the day as a difficult day.
Right.
Or whatever it is, I don't think that person likes me, then my whole existence and the way I operate around that person is within the thinking that I'm gripped by that has me exist within that reality. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that it does, but I think what when we sat down and we talked about this together, it's about, for me, it's about like shifting away a lot of the things that are obscuring my view. So in other words, my view, if I'm looking out and looking at my career or whatever, there's all sorts of interference there's branches and there's stuff flying across and there's stuff which is obstructing my view. To me, I kind of got the feeling that it's about shifting the view, because if I'm clear in my thinking and there's not sort of interruptions coming in all the time, I can focus on the important stuff. That was kind of I felt that was from how I was looking at it, because it's only when you get that clarity that you can then, as you say, regain control and take back the power over the situation.
So let me build on that and say, so what our thought is doing is it's often hijacking us. It's hijacking us from the clarity and the effectiveness. It's coming in and it's making comment about what our potential is, whether we're good or not, whether we like that person or not, and so on and so on. And as the thought does that, it has us live in that experience, and then it totally shapes how effective we are in any moment. So what really this is about is it's about understanding more about the nature of what thought is.
Yeah.
It's not the truth. We live within thought like it's our thought.
Yeah.
We live within thought like it's real and it's the way it is. Mm-hmm. I am just that type of person. I can't help it.
Right.
But actually, that's just a paradigm that we've lived within through having hundreds and thousands of thoughts over the years that shape us to believe in whatever the thought is producing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that then can significantly limit us in any moment.
Right. What do you mean by limit us?
Well, if I'm living in a reality, in a paradigm, a set way of thinking about myself or about what I'm good at or not good at, or what the company's looking for, or what the market's like at the moment, if I'm living in the thought that says it is this way, mm-hmm. then it prevents me from being powerful in any moment. It might mean that I job hunt in a different way because I'm worried.
Okay.
So I'm existing in thinking like I need to get a job quick because I don't want it to look bad on my CV.
Yes.
So what that can do is then it can paralyze me. It can have me be edgy and nervous. It can have me go for jobs that I really shouldn't go for.
Yeah.
It can have me exist and make decisions and do things that aren't actually that wise.
But I mean, a lot of the time, I think people take jobs. They go through an interview process and they continue in an interview process, and then ultimately they're offered the job and they take the job without actually stopping to think, is this really the right job for me? It's just precisely the problem that you're alluding to, I think.
And the question is, why are they doing that? What thinking have they got underneath those decisions? And there's often layers of unconscious thought that's shaping them to do that, that actually then isn't the best thing for them.
Okay. So it's about stripping some of that stuff out.
Yes. Absolutely. It's about learning about that to such a deep level that then you access what we would call wisdom. You start to think more clearly and more cleverly about what you want and why you want it. Okay. Good. Because the other thing that happens a lot is people take a role. Yeah. Just to have the job, and then they get in. I mean, I don't know what the stats are on this now, but people that get in, and I've worked with many that 3 months after they've got into the role, they're like, oh my goodness, I don't think I should have taken this. Yes. It happens a lot, doesn't it? You find that people actually, and I've had those discussions with people where you try and explain something to them, and you actually know that they're in the wrong place. They just can't make the decision because they're in the wrong place sometimes. And they need to kind of, as you say, regain control. Yeah. Okay. But moving on,
How do we apply this to our everyday life? How does it really benefit us?
Right. So really, what we're in what this is all about is it's about understanding the mind. And when you understand the mind, it's less an application, it's less tips and techniques. I mean, in many webinars people go to or books that they read, they're looking for, okay, what are the techniques that I need to do? What 3 things can I take away and do differently as a result of this?
Yeah.
This is slightly different. So let me use a metaphor to explain that. So if I want to help you drive a car better, then I can give you 3 tips and techniques on how to drive the car better, and you can go and you can try them out and so on.
Yeah.
And that will help you to some extent, but it probably won't help you drive it like Vettel or Hamilton.
No.
What I'm about is what this is about is it's about teaching you the mechanics of the car to such a deep level that when you understand the mechanics of the car, your knowledge when you're going around that turn on a hairpin bend, your knowledge and your experience and your understanding of the car is so deep rooted in you that you know what you can do.
So you're actually having a totally different sort of approach because you do understand what's happening.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You can actually, you can actually understand sort of why I'm thinking like this, or what I should be doing in terms of my thought process, and therefore I can make better decisions, whether that's in my leadership role or in my job change situation or whatever.
Yeah, well, let me just bring it back to the one point I've sort of made so far, is that we're talking about the nature of thought.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's, people can Google this and find all sorts of amazing YouTube clips on reality is an illusion.
Yeah.
So our thought is creating our reality.
Yeah.
And the reality that it creates is not real and true. It feels very real and true, but it's actually an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's many times when our thought is tricking us and we think something and then we find out some other information. We go, oh my God, how silly of me to think that.
Yeah.
Now, what do you need to do? Coming back to your how do you apply this, this is not something you apply. This is something you sort of remember in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you remember in the moment what I'm just talking about here, you won't trust your thought in quite the same way. So then you are naturally less gripped by whatever's going on in your mind. Right.
But I guess that the same is true, I guess, if you go back to the sporting analogy, whether it's somebody who is rock climbing or whether it's somebody who is skiing or whatever, there are some things that you're starting to do instinctively because you understand them better.
Right, it's a brilliant point, right? And it flows into what I wanted to come on to, really, which is we have this natural ability to do things really, really well, mm-hmm. right? So the rock climber climbs the difficult rock face without thinking about it. The person that scores the penalty, you ask them afterwards, well, what did it feel like, and what did you do, and what were you thinking? And they're like, well, I don't really know. Mm. Because actually they're not cognitively thinking, they're just what we call being in the zone, or being in flow.
We see this in several sports, don't we? Whether it's rugby or football or cricket or whatever, we see this in several sports, don't we? The people are kind of in the zone.
Yes.
And you look at some sort of really exceptional baseball players or whatever, if they're in that right zone, they just get it exactly right, don't they?
Yes. Now everyone experiences this in other things. So in work, people will experience this doing a presentation, mm-hmm. or having a difficult phone call, or preparing a strategic document, and they could be there for 3 hours working on something, and they look at the watch and they go, oh my goodness, it's 12 o'clock. Where did the time go?
Yeah.
And that's another example of people being in flow. And there's certain characteristics of the flow state. One is that it's a timeless experience, so time disappears. It's effortless, so it's very easy for us, very natural for us to perform without thinking about it in those times. And it's kind of selfless as well. We're not sort of in the way of it with our own thinking. We're just operating. And really, this is the key to success in the job market, in work generally, in life generally, is to trust this natural ability we've got to show up and be highly effective when we're not caught up by the thought that comes along and constrains us.
Can we just pause there for a minute, because I think that kind of brilliantly captures what this is all about. And what I think of as sort of a concert pianist or a violinist or a singer or something. When you see somebody who's performing and they're in that space and they know exactly what they're doing, it's beautiful. But that if they've had a family tragedy that happened, yesterday or the day before or whatever, the music doesn't sound quite the same.
Yep. And or if they're anxious or worried about how they're coming across or something else. Yeah.
So if we take that point about being anxious and worried about how we come across, because that in my experience as a headhunter, that's something which I see all the time. People are often anxious about how they come across. So how does your work and the stuff that you do, Martin, how does that help people deal with that type of situation?
Well, it helps people be their natural self, the full version of whatever they are. So their full potential, so to speak. It helps them be naturally as powerful as they can be in any moment without them getting in their own way. So it means they can show up for an interview and listen, they might not be right for the job. They might not be the best candidate, but at least they'll show up and be self-expressed and powerful and calm and clear in the process.
Well, often, the candidate that shows up for the interview is not the right for the job. And actually, when you think about it afterwards, you think, well, actually, maybe I wasn't right for that job. Actually, that job wasn't right for me, and maybe that's why I didn't perform. But as long as you give your best, then you shouldn't. You at least have the opportunity to consider that role.
Yes.
And be a candidate for it.
Absolutely. So this whole approach is to help people be their best naturally without, because when we're thinking about stuff, thinking about cognitively, rationally, we're analyzing, we're preparing, we're planning, we've got a script of how we're going to answer every question and what we're going to say and so on and so on. Actually, it sends us into a self-conscious state that is not the one that we're talking about here. It's not the flow state.
So this self-conscious state that you're talking about, that is a state of over-preparedness. That's when people sort of over-analyze everything that somebody could possibly say in the interview. And if the interviewer asks me this, then I'm going to say that, and I'm going to answer this question in that way. And we're sort of we're over-engineered, I suppose, in that scenario. Whereas what you're trying to get to is you're trying to get people into a zone whereby they can be their natural selves.
Yes.
Whether that's doing their executive job or whether that's doing an interview, they can be their natural selves.
Yes. So, and this conversation, Anthony, is an example of this because, and I'm not saying don't prepare, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't prepare for the interview and don't plan an important presentation. Of course, plan and prepare. But if one relies on that and doesn't trust one's natural ability, then all of that planning goes into rational over-processing, over-analyzing, and it hijacks. And so in this conversation, we had a conversation, we planned and prepared this interview. We had a script and we had some questions that you and I were going to ask and answer and so on. But actually what we're really doing now is we've used that as a little bit of a format, but then now we're operating in flow state.
Yeah. Yeah, because, and I think, the good interviews actually, I think, and obviously I've guided hundreds and hundreds of candidates through these interviews over the years, but good interviews, they just happen. And they don't happen because there's a format and there's a very strict schedule. Good interviews just happen. They happen because the interviewer and the interviewee get into that flow state as you describe, where it's a very natural conversation. There isn't any sort of over-structured element to it.
Yes. And there's a significant, you feel different, right? As when you're having those conversations, there's a connection and there's a timelessness, but there's also an enjoyment of those types of conversations that's dramatically different to the other scenarios that we talked about.
Yeah, I think it's applicable in lots of other walks of life, and I sort of come back to the idea of like the sports person who is taking a penalty, or I sing in a little choir, and when we're doing a new piece of music, we're all stressed because we're all trying to track exactly what's happening and how we're doing and stuff like that. But we know that in a few weeks' time, by the time we get to the performance, we're just going to do it. It just comes.
Yeah.
And you don't need to sort of sit there and sort of with a pencil and paper and plan it. It just comes, doesn't it?
Yes.
And that's where what we're aiming for, I think. So the people who've joined us today on the call are obviously curious about this stuff and they want to understand a bit more about it. What can people do? How does it? If I've just sort of I'm hearing this stuff for the first time, I haven't met Martin Palethorpe before, but I'm kind of interested in this stuff and this is resonating with me now. What do I do as the next step?
The other thing just before I answer that, the other thing I'd say with this conversation is it's pretty different to anything that I've come across before,
right,
and most people have experienced. So I'm having a conversation here that is quite hard to grasp. It's not, and most of the time we're using our rational mind to logically understand something and go, oh, I get it. Yes. Mm-hmm. Whereas this is almost an experiential, a deeper sort of experiential learning.
Yeah.
So, and in such a short time, I'm not expecting people to totally have got it, but maybe some people on this call might think this is barking mad, but there'll be others that will have got a sense of, to some extent, I sort of get a feeling of this makes some sense.
Okay.
And if you're in that category, then you could certainly have a look at our website, thepragmagroup.com. You could have a look at the Pragma Group YouTube channel. There's a whole load of videos on there of me talking on various topics that are similar, are related.
I should say to people that we're going to give you your web address at the end, so we'll share that so they can find out.
Great. But also we run programs on this. So we run open programs, 3-day programs where people can really immerse themselves in these concepts to such a degree that it literally does, and I don't use this word lightly, but it literally does transform the way that people think about themselves, their life, their work, and so on.
Now, you and I have obviously had a couple of conversations, Martin, and we started this dialogue some years ago. But what I find is that this is a really interesting area, but it's not an area that I've come across a lot before. So it makes all the sense in the world, but I can't just pick up a book, in the local careers section of my bookshop and learn about it. I've really got to get into more of a dialogue. I've got to really kind of have that iterative conversation with you to really understand where this is taking me. And I guess if I'm going to train my brain to think in a different way, I've got to devote the time to it. There's no alternative, really, is there?
Yes, I'd agree with that. There are many books that you can read on related subjects, by the way. I mean, there's many fields that are pointing at this, our learning from many different angles.
Okay.
But yes, I certainly agree with you, which is, if we think about it, really, the mind, we experience everything and anything through our mind.
Yeah.
So to not become a master and go on a lifelong journey of learning about and being more effective with our mind, to me that seems kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So I would certainly invite people, if they want to be more effective, more productive, more focused, more at peace, more self-expressed, more connected with others, then learning about the mind is absolutely critical and worthy cause.
I mean, I think regardless of whatever your discipline is in business, whether you're a finance person, a marketing person, or a procurement, whatever, you go into the world of work having done some education and some training, and you've learned some basic skills at school or at college or wherever. And then as you go through your work, you're adding to the toolkit. You might go on some special training that's sponsored by your company at various stages. You have experience. You might be doing this job or that job, and that kind of all of that adds to the toolkit. And I think it seems to me this is a really, really important part of the toolkit. And I just think people are not aware of this generally. I mean, I don't know what your perception is. Are people aware of this stuff or not really?
Most people not. But my prediction is in the next 20 years, it's going to become mainstream, a bit like sports psychology has done.
Yeah.
It's going to become mainstream because it is the foundational element that has such a dramatic impact on my effectiveness.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think
as you were saying that, I just thought of another sporting example.
Yes, please, far away.
For those in Britain, Andy Murray, before he won a major,
yeah,
he had the potential. He had the game, but what he didn't have is he didn't have the mindset, and so he would get angry and edgy and annoyed with himself. And that would always prevent him at some point. It would sort of get in the way. And then at some point, he's happened linearly by, I don't know what he did behind the scenes, but now, he's been out for a year, hasn't he? But once he won a major, this whole process that he then started to seem to walk like a leader, someone that was successful, play in a different way with a level of grace and confidence and assurity. And the only difference there, sure, he might have improved certain techniques or something, but the difference between doing well in life and doing amazingly, really, a lot of it is our ability to master the mind.
And I can't, it's very interesting you talk about the way somebody walks. We meet a lot of chief executives, obviously, in the work that we do as headhunters, and there are some people who just get it. You can see they've got they're self-assured, they know, they understand, they can deal with stuff which is thrown at them, and they lap it up, and you can see why they're effective as chief executives. You see other people who maybe tried it once, and they just hate it. They hate it because for whatever reason, it just doesn't click. They get too obsessed with some aspect of the job, or how am I coming across? Do people like me, or whatever it is? They get too obsessed with one element of it, and I think that will prevent them sometimes being successful in that really, really top level important executive role. Yes,
I mean, this is a really great point, also, which is you can almost work out what someone's thinking by the sense that you get from them, and you must have a refined art in this, Anthony, from what you do, but if someone's comfortable with themselves or relaxed in a situation, then they give off a certain energy that people pick up.
Yeah, when I'm writing the candidate reports that I share with my clients, I talk about people having a good sense of self. This lady has a good sense of self. In other words, she gives off that aura of actually she knows who she is, she knows what she's doing, why she's doing it, and where she's going.
Yeah.
I describe it as that sense of self, and I think the training that you're talking about, these programs, really fascinating. Could you? I'm going to just before we get to the Q&A, Martin, I wanted to ask you a question. If I'm executive and I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, actually, I'd really like to take this one step further. What would that look like? What would I be doing?
What with the Pragma Group specifically, or just generally?
No, with the Pragma Group specifically. If I say, look, I understand what Martin's saying. I'm listening to this. I know that I need to, sharpen my senses in this regard. What would I be doing? How do I take this forward?
Right. I think an easy first step is we've got a free online tool called the Quality of Mind Indicator.
And that's the one that's on this website.
I believe so. Yes, it is. Actually, it's on now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that helps you in 10 different areas. You fill out 60 plus questions, and it gives you a free automated report to help you look at your psychological effectiveness in 10 different areas. It's a great thing you could start off doing to reflect on yourself, because we're only touching on certain elements of what we're talking about with quality of mind here. We're majoring on things like confidence and comfort with self, but there are other things like our ability to connect with people. Yeah. For example, are we, because sometimes, just to say this, Anthony, is the people that are assured and comfortable with themselves can also be extremely critical and judgmental of others. Yes. And that's not an effective use of the mind. No. So there's many different elements. So they could fill out that. That's
a free tool, is it? That Quality of Mind Indicator.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So there's no reason why anybody wouldn't want to use that. Have a go.
No. And from that they get a whole lot of information that they could read and reflect on. Okay. We also offer a free 20-minute conversation to help make sense of it for them. If they're interested, that's written in the report. Okay. After that, when they feel free to reach out to us anyway for a conversation. And as I say, we run a lot of programs internally in organisations. We run it one-to-one, but we also run open programs, 3-day open programs that people could come on. Okay, that's really helpful. Really helpful.
We need to save some time for questions. I've got a couple of good questions here. In addition to what I was just asking you, somebody had asked me about how to take this thing forward. I've got a technical question here for you, Martin. How is your methodology different from the one outlined by, it looks like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi in his flow theory?
Haile Csikszentmihalyi, I can't remember his name, but yes. He's the guy that originally he originally in 1973, I think, defined what we're talking about, one element of what we're talking about here as flow state. Okay. So he's naming some aspects of what we teach, and so he's naming the state that we help people get into. Okay. Okay. Our approach is to teach learnings about the mind that enable you to access that state that he's describing more freely, more easily, more often. Okay. So your work is complementary to this flow theory from Mihaly, whose surname I can't spell. I can't pronounce. Yes. Well, he's defining this flow state, and we're pointing to that and to say actually it's a natural state that we've all got inside us. Okay. Yeah. It's definitely aligned to that. Okay. As far as I'm aware, he's a psychologist, so he's not training people in anything to help them transform themselves. So we're in the field of personal development. Yes. So we're interested in how do we help people gain insight to transform how they live and work, as opposed to providing academic papers on it. I understand. Yeah. There's another question here from one of our members. With a situation where you've got pressure and financial, career, or otherwise, and this interferes with your job search. So, we're all dealing with day-to-day life, and it gets in the way of some things that we're trying to do in terms of the job search. Are there some practical steps that you could recommend to somebody who finds themselves in that situation? Right.
I'm thinking of, like, we deal with these people a lot, in my world. You get somebody who, they really want to move things forward in terms of their job search, but they can't. And there's too much kind of general noise going on.
And the general noise is?
Well, it's often just, I'm too focused on the day-to-day stuff, and I'm not focused on what I should be looking at, which is, where's my career going? Why am I feeling frustrated in my current role? I call it the email syndrome. You're just stuck on the email, and you don't actually stop and think, hang on a minute, I've actually been in this job for too long. My brain has moved on. I need to recognize that and take my career elsewhere.
So I'm trying to reflect right back to the exact question that the person asked. One of the things that dawned on me was that there's the thinking that I've got. They mentioned finances, didn't they, for a start?
Yeah.
I've got responsibility, I've got finances, I've got a situation I've got to sort out, and so on. And one of the things I would invite anyone to do is to look at the thinking, the conscious thinking and the subconscious thinking that is shaping the way they are, what they're living in, and the way they're acting, and what they think they need to do. So people have thinking about money, for example.
Yeah.
They have thinking about what it looks like if they move now in their career after 1 year. They have thinking about they need to get a job fast because it would look bad, and so on. And so they exist within those paradigms that then drive their behavior. And the first thing I would invite people to do is to challenge and look at all of those paradigms that are driving them.
Yeah. So you need to take time out. Just take time out, whether it's the weekend or the evening or whatever. Take time out and look at those paradigms.
Yes, and so the question is, is everything we say is a paradigm that we're existing within, and the question is, are you sure that's the truth?
Okay.
Are you sure? So another quite common one is, well, I've got to get a job because I need to provide security for my family.
Yeah.
Well, and often that's just a paradigm that they're living within that's then shaping and driving the behavior that is not that helpful to them, and it's not true anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I think actually that's often the case, is that people make certain assumptions about their current situation, and it's just not true. They just got it wrong. They just got it wrong, and they need to stop, think, reflect. And often I think as an outsider, whether you're doing the executive coaching role or you're doing the headhunting role where we're the sort of amateur coach, we see things differently. And therefore you as the executive, you don't actually see things as they really are. You're living in this other paradigm. Yeah. Or you're stuck in this other paradigm often.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if go on.
No, carry on, Martin. Answer the question.
Well, it's like it totally conditions and shapes ineffective behaviour. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. The other thing I was going to come on and say, just because sometimes people like practical things. Yeah. A couple of other comments I would say here is our feelings are giving us an indication of the quality of our mind and our thinking.
Okay.
If I have a strong feeling that is negative, if I feel nervous or angry or frustrated, then the quality of my thinking and the quality, hence, of my behavior is not likely to be high. Okay. It's not likely to be that good. So an example of this is if it's 7 o'clock at night, I've had a long day, there's been lots of challenges and difficulty, I'm actually feeling angry and frustrated. It's not the time to make a decision on my career. It's not the time to make a decision about sending that email or having that conversation, because actually it's not going to be effective. Yeah. So our feelings are a barometer to tell us the level of quality, the quality of our thinking. Yeah. And when we're not in a resourceful state, actually it's better to let time pass a little and wait for your system to rebalance and then deal with this difficult situation or think it through when you've got better quality thinking.
Okay, better quality thinking.
And the last thing I'd just say on this topic of is, how are you living your life? Are you setting your life up to be effective for you? Because we know there's many things that don't help us with our frame of mind.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, not sleeping enough, drinking too much coffee, not exercising. I mean, listen, that's not the purpose of this call, but, there are some simple, drinking a lot of water. There's some simple basics that many people don't do, but actually physiologically it's impacting the power and effectiveness of how we use the mind.
It's all about getting clarity, isn't it? It's about going for clarity and about give your mind a chance to become clear. Yeah. Yep. I have a very practical question before we forget. One of our members has asked, do you have programs in Switzerland? And I guess by that it means, look, if he or she is based in Switzerland, how can they access your programs, right. or should they call you and email you directly?
They should email us directly. We run programs around Europe. But at the moment only for clients internally. Okay. We have our open programs are based here in the south of the UK, but we also provide one-to-one coaching all over the world. So, and we typically do that primarily via video conference. Okay.
But I mean, I put your email up on the screen there, Martin, as well as your website, so that people can contact you directly. I just want to check if there are any more questions from our audience today. Is there anything I should have asked Martin that I haven't covered in our discussion today?
Nothing springs to mind.
Look, for me, this is an ongoing discussion that we've had, you and I, over a long time. But it's sort of, I can see it's so obvious now when I think about it. Having clarity of mind and really understanding how my mind is working, it helps me to sleep better. It helps me to perform better in what I do, and it helps me to be clear about what my goals are. That's how I've responded to the discussions that you and I've had, and I think that a lot of other people would benefit from that kind of stuff.
Yes. And I totally agree. And there's one other element I would add to this, which is it helps me to be better with other people also.
Yes. Okay.
Because also, a lot of people that get to the top because they're very driven, result focused, and very successful, but can not be effective with other people. Yeah. And the other key element of using the mind effectively is to not get caught up in judgment and criticism and blame or lacking trust in others. When we're really using the mind powerfully, it enables us to connect with all sorts really well.
So using the mind better helps you make better connections with other people.
Yes. So we do a lot of this work inside teams, executive teams. Yeah. And if you look at the classic executive teams that no doubt everyone on this call has been involved with at some point, is look at what's going on in a team. There's there's he that doesn't trust her. These two have got different agendas. The conversation, someone's speaking and they're not listening to each other because they're going off on different tangents. There's all sorts of massive elements where the mind plays a massive role, and what it does is it thwarts the effectiveness of the team to discuss, debate, listen to each other, and actually be effective and united in how they operate.
Yeah. Well, listen, Martin, it's been fabulous and fascinating as always, and I really appreciate you coming on this evening to talk to us. And unless you have any other questions, I'm going to say thank you to all our audience today. And thank you to Martin Palethorpe from the Pragma Group, www.thepragmagroup.com. And I should quickly put up on the screen the details of the quality of mind indicator, qom.thepragmagroup.com. Well worth a few minutes of your time. So thanks very much, everybody. and we look forward to speaking to you soon. Please don't forget to answer the short survey afterwards, and hope you can join us next time. Cheerio. Bye for now.
Thanks, Anthony. Thank you.
Bye-bye.